So, hello, we're talking to Paul Jordan today, who's one of the contributors to our special issue on the Eurovision Song Contest. And you're focusing particular on Ukraine's contributions to the Eurovision Song Contest. So, what has been the trajectory of Ukraine in its contributions over the years in terms of, also you mentioned the kind of political relevance within Ukraine of the Eurovision Song Contest. Maybe you can outline briefly what has been the main kind of markers, points in this process.
Well, I would say Ukraine's participation in Eurovision has been political from the outset. They entered Eurovision specifically to improve their international image, and actually the idea didn't come from a TV company, it came from a PR agency who then approached the TV company. And that was back in 2003, and as Eurovision was expanding and increasing in numbers. So Ukraine's participation is an interesting one to watch, because they actually came to Eurovision much later, Soviet states, nearly a decade later. And that, in a sense, is a reflection, really, of Ukraine's kind of protracted European integration process. You know, Ukraine has kind of somehow lagged behind other countries, and that's really manifested in Eurovision. But if you look at the way Ukraine has hosted Eurovision, has participated, they've been very, very political in terms of their messaging. So in 2005, after the Orange Revolution, the theme was Awakening. If you look at the entry that year as well, it was called Together We Are Many. And it was really a political chant from that revolution. So that in itself was a political message, even though politics isn't meant to be there in Eurovision. But there's all sorts of kind of soft politics going on as well. So in 2012 in Baku, we had Gaitana, who's herself mixed race, and she sang a song called Be My Guest. And that was the same year that Ukraine were hosting Euro 2012, the football championship. So that was a really interesting one in terms of projecting a kind of image of Ukraine as welcoming, as open. But actually, a lot of the internal politics was it was a bit of a counter narrative. Gaitana was criticised by a politician in Ukraine, and she was, I think he tried to actually get her disqualified because the politician said that she failed to represent organic Ukrainian culture, basically because she wasn't white. So, I mean, she was a very, very good ambassador for Ukraine, and totally turned that on its head. So every year there's politics when it comes to Ukraine, and even with Verka Kuduki, the track in 2007, Lasha Tumbai was the lie. That actually sounded very much like Russia goodbye. Of course, they denied that, but it was very ambitious, to say the least.
And also, I guess it feeds back into Ukrainian politics. I mean, Ruslana was, after she won the Eurovision Song Contest, quite active in the Orange Revolution, and her song was played, and she was kind of an activist, a political activist, right?
And she was, yeah, and she was in the last revolution in 2013 as well. She was there on the main stage again in Maidan, the big square in Kiev. So she was very much a political figure, and she became a politician actually shortly after she won Eurovision. And it was very, very random. I was there in November, and there was a Georgia-Ukraine rally, and who would be there but Saakashvili, who was the former Georgian president, and Ruslana herself. So, you know, she's a very political figure. She's very much about promoting Ukraine. It's very telling that when she won, at her press conference, she said, "I would like you to forget about Chernobyl." And Chernobyl is a real issue that certainly, when I was doing my research, it seems to be ingrained on the Ukrainian psyche in terms of the international image of Ukraine, and she was very instrumental in terms of trying to project a different image of Ukraine. And I would say she's a cultural ambassador for the country, but you know, she's got her work cut out for her because Ukraine is a very complicated country.
Right. But how is the crisis in Ukraine, how does that now feed into Ukraine's participation in Eurovision? Because is there? I mean, you mentioned Ruslana participating still at the Maidan protest as well, but does it also work the other way around? I mean, Ukraine's contributions to the Eurovision or its position there.
Well, if you look at the song last year, it's called TikTok, and I wrote an article saying that in a sense it was like Ukraine was the ticking time bomb, and they had a song. They had the performance was with a dancer on what looked like a hamster wheel. It was quite bizarre looking. But it almost, I think, was a metaphor for Ukraine in turmoil. You know, the way the singer interacted with the dancer and the dancer spinning out of control. This year, Ukraine aren't even here, and it's a real shame. But the Ukrainian television company said it's a mixture of financial reasons and, of course, political turmoil. You know, there is a war in the country. Ukraine's a very different country to the country it was even a year ago. And so somehow I think it's perhaps a little inappropriate for them to be taking part in Eurovision this year. And even though Bosnia-Herzegovina in the 1990s went to Eurovision specifically to show themselves on the international stage. So I think it is a great thing Ukraine is here. I'm not surprised at all.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, would you see that the Eurovision is a stage? I mean, because it's one that you mentioned, it's a stage for Ukraine to, again, as many countries use it, and you describe the role of PR agencies as a way to promote the country abroad, but then also to promote oneself or one's own view back in Ukraine. So, do you see this kind of as a two-way process?
Absolutely. I think, it's a way of Ukraine manifesting itself on the world stage, but it also, when they won Eurovision, it was hugely important for them to be accepted by Europe, and that was a very, very symbolic moment for them. One thing that really sticks in my mind, though, is that when I was there in Kiev in 2005, there was a big poster, and it was of the Ukrainian flag, and it said, "Leave your wishes for the Ukrainian people here." And it was basically a big billboard where people could write messages of goodwill. And I remember signing the board, and I often think, what happened to that board, but also whatever happened to those good wishes to the Ukrainian people? Somehow, I don't think those hopes and dreams come true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point, and I think it's, maybe your observation at the end that it's striking that Ukraine is not participating this year, especially considering that that is of course such a showcase, but also maybe realizing that the Eurovision is taken more seriously in some countries than like Ukraine or Russia or Azerbaijan than it is maybe in most Western countries, which enjoy the show but don't take the politics all that serious.
Absolutely, and when they hosted Eurovision, I mean, it was massive. It was a huge moment for them. Eurovision, I'm not going to exaggerate it, Eurovision isn't all that popular in Ukraine. The TV company, national television channel, doesn't get massive viewing figures for it, but it was a very symbolic moment for them, and to host it was very, very important. But I remember being there and thinking, this is something very, very special. There were people who were really, really invested in promoting Ukraine, but when it came to the organisation, the European Broadcasting Union went there in February 2005 to check that everything was on course, and the supervisor, Francis Stokelius at the time, found that even a venue with an agreement with the venue hadn't even been signed because of the revolution. There'd been massive delays, and he was taken by the president. He was taken to the president by the Ukrainian TV company to actually discuss Eurovision, and the president intervened to make sure that Eurovision could stay in Ukraine. And also, if you look at the foreign policy, this is probably one of the only examples of Eurovision actually changing foreign policy. In 2005, Ukraine had quite strict visa regulations, and they were waived for EU nationals. And that is still in place today, and that was introduced specifically to Eurovision. So you've got there an example of Eurovision actually altering a country's foreign policy.
Well, that's maybe an encouraging sign, lifting visa restrictions for Eurovision and then staying on. Well, Paul, thank you so much for your article and your interview today.
Thank you.